In today's breaking story, we have a very prominent Democrat fighting to right the wrong that was the Supreme Court decision to give Donald Trump presidential immunity.
This is a big step.
Because of all the mind-boggling stories of the past 2 weeks that have taken up all the processing power of our cerebral hard drives, let me fire up the time machine and take you back a few weeks before the assassination attempt and before the Harris blue wave as a quick refresher. And then I'll share the story that has Trump very worried that he's going to lose his get-out-of-jail-free card.
It is the biggest case on presidential power in decades.
In 248 years of our history has never actually ruled on this, so it is big and sweeping.
In one of its most anticipated rulings of the year, the Supreme Court declared that former President Donald Trump is immune from criminal prosecution.
Those were the headlines just 1 month ago, and here's the legal eagle to break it down in a style I just love, and I think you will too. And like me, you just might learn something new. And then I'll have the story of how another legal eagle, whose domain is the Senate floor, is pushing to unravel the unfortunate ruling by the stacked and biased Supreme Court.
However bad you think it is, it's worse. Remember when Trump's lawyers argued that he could SEAL Team 6 his political rivals, and we all laughed because that's a preposterous thing for anyone to argue, and absolutely no serious person could possibly believe that the Constitution or the laws of this country would allow that to be the rule. Well, the Supreme Court just said, hold my beer while I assassinate my political rivals.
The president is entitled for total personal gain to use the trappings of his office. That's what you're trying to get us to hold.
Yes, the Supreme Court has effectively given law-breaking presidents, and we're not singling any one law-breaking president out or anything, could be any felonious president, almost absolute immunity from criminal prosecution. And where the court did not grant outright absolute immunity, it gave presumptive immunity and procedural protections that might as well have been absolute immunity. And while unofficial acts of the president still receive no immunity, the crap cherry on top of this crap sundae is that even though a president now has immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts as president, a prosecutor cannot even use official acts as evidence in a prosecution over unofficial acts, which makes prosecution of some unofficial acts virtually impossible.
The legal eagle senator that I teased is Chuck Schumer, who has been very vocal in opposing the ruling. Here's what he said just a few days ago, and on the other side, I'll reveal the major step he's taken today to thwart the political monarchy that is the Supreme Court and the protective castle they've constructed around their king.
No democracy can hope to survive if it can't ensure accountability. That's a hallmark of a democracy, and American democracy in particular. This was the stern warning handed down to us by the framers of the Constitution. Accountability is how power is checked, how consent to the governed is secured, and how trust between the people and their institutions is preserved.
And now let's fast forward to today and the massive step that Senator Schumer is taking as a countermeasure to the Supreme Court ruling and a strategy for holding Donald Trump accountable. It begins with an NBC News headline that reads, Chuck Schumer rolls out No Kings Act to eliminate presidential immunity. And the article goes on to say, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer on Thursday announced a bill that would ensure that presidents do not have criminal immunity. The legislation is a direct response to the Supreme Court's ruling last month that former President Donald Trump has some immunity for aspects of his presidential conduct. Given the dangerous and consequential implications of the court's ruling, legislation would be the fastest and most efficient method to correcting the grave precedent the Trump ruling presented, Schumer said in a statement. With this glaring and partisan overreach, Congress has an obligation and a constitutional authority to act as a check and balance to the judicial branch. The legislation, dubbed the No Kings Act, would ensure that neither sitting nor former presidents and vice presidents are entitled to immunity from prosecution for alleged crime. The bill has more than 24 Democratic signers. If it is passed, the legislation would make it clear that Congress has the power to determine to whom federal criminal laws may be applied, not the Supreme Court, according to the bill's outline provided by Schumer's office. In his statement explaining his reasoning for the legislation, Schumer called the Supreme Court's decision about Trump's immunity disastrous, arguing that the Supreme Court threw out centuries of precedent and anointed Trump and subsequent presidents as kings above the law. Chief Justice John Roberts said in his majority opinion for the court that lower courts needed to determine through additional proceedings what Trump could face prosecution for. Roberts wrote that the nature of presidential power requires that a former president have some immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts during his tenure in office. Democrats strongly objected, and President Joe Biden on Monday called for a constitutional amendment to make clear that there is no immunity for crimes a former president committed while in office. A quick review of the act. It states that no president, past or present, is above the law. It allows for criminal prosecution of presidents for actions taken during their time in office. It clarifies that presidential immunity does not extend to acts that abuse or exceed the powers of the office, and the act would apply retroactively, ensuring that Trump can't escape justice for his past actions. And it reaffirms Congress's authority to define the scope of presidential immunity. And Schumer fighting this good fight also highlights the importance of the upcoming presidential election and the hope to restore some balance to the Supreme Court. With the current 6-3 conservative majority, we're seeing decisions that threaten long-held rights and protections. A Democratic president would have the opportunity to nominate justices who interpret the Constitution through a more progressive lens. I think the court's recent rulings on abortion rights, voting access, and environmental regulations also underscore the urgent need for change. Ultimately, a more balanced court would better reflect the will of the people and safeguard the rights of marginalized communities. And now I want to know what you think about the state of the Supreme Court and Schumer's No Kings Act. Please comment below. I'm Dan, and I'll see you next time for Occupy Democrats.